I have the greatest job in the world. I get to make paintings about how much I love nature. And my work has been focusing on these issues, and it's become increasingly clear to me that the biodiversity crisis and climate change are serious problems. But one of the things I want to share with you is how I went on this journey that I started as a little kid. I used to collect animals in my room. I have gone through all sorts of trips all over the world. Things don't change, obviously. I'm still that kid who's holding the frog. My first artwork was always about undersea life, and you'll see that things haven't changed a lot. And I see nature as a place of enchantment and wonder. And I have to say that I cut school to make this drawing. I remember very well. I did not have a fever. I think I put the thermometer on the light bulb. The earth is fragile, and I've become increasingly aware of it from paying attention to people like Rachel Carson. These people have changed my life. There's dozens and dozens of people. I'm just going to talk a little bit about them and how they brought the word of the wonder of nature to urban places, and how they influenced me and gave me a path to try to find a life where I could do what I love to do every day. Sylvia Earle, obviously. I'm one of those kids that walks by a puddle and imagines what's underneath the puddle. I want to see snorkeling. To me is like the miraculous view. I want to be in the ocean. I want to be in the pond, in the lake. I see anything that's wet. I want to be underneath it. One of the things that I wanted to talk about also is my interest in the climate crisis, which started in the early 90s, and this is one of the first paintings that I made about it. That's when the snowball Earth scenario was included. That's since gone by the wayside. I see that as one of the most foremost challenges that we have in our future. I really want to talk about the project that I just finished, Oceanus, which is opening at the Mystic Seaport Museum on May 24th. I hope you guys can come. It's Memorial Day weekend. And one of the things that I also wanted to say is when you're an artist, you get to control your own production, which means you go to the office every day, which is your studio, and you think about what do you want to do with your life. And this painting is almost 24 feet long and 8 feet tall. And I was approached by Christina Conant Brophy at the Mystic Seaport Museum. She said, "We want you to do whatever you want to do with our collection as long as you include it." And I said, well, why don't I make a painting about the history of the ocean through the lens of your great institution? I mean, it was really a dream project. And I had access to their historians and scientists for, basically at my beck and call, which is great. I organized the project around the history of their watercraft, which is in chronological order. And if you go across the top, that's the earliest on the upper left, and then you go through the middle, and then it ends with Chinese illegal fishing on the lower right. Why not there? Hopefully that's not our future. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was how do these vessels exploit certain parts of the ocean? And obviously we are very familiar with whaling, the history of whaling, the history of fishing, deep sea exploitation. There's many people that are going to be talking about that tonight. I think that's very interesting. One thing I want to be clear is that I make these paintings by hand. This is my job. I go to the studio. Here's me working on the painting about, a year ago or so. And you can see how physical this is. I mean, this is me alone in a room. My wife is taking the photograph, of course. I have some people help me put it together, but one of the great things about being an artist is you get to talk about issues that might be a little tough in a corporate environment. I can be critical of things. I can use satire. I can use all these languages that entertainment uses. Being an artist, you can basically use anything that you can think of as arrows in your quiver. So another thing I wanted to mention was there's 10 very large works on paper that are included in this, and this is a permanent commission, which is really a dream come true. That's the full painting, and I just wanted to mention something that I'm particularly proud of, which is a quote from Sylvia Earle wrote an introduction to the book that Rizzoli just published. So I think she's cool. I'm thrilled that she takes me seriously. So I just had to share that with you guys since she seems to be big in the room, so to speak. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I have a long history of doing this stuff. That's me on the upper left in 1992 working on a painting called Evolution. There's me over the years in my old studio in New York. I recently moved to Connecticut about 3 years ago. And here are some of the paintings that I made that relate to water and the ocean over the years. 1988, Drop of Water, Fantasies of Microscopic Life, taken from an engraving, critique of microscopic visions of Thames water in London in the 19th century. Here's a science fiction painting I made in 1994 that was inspired by the Boston Aquarium, for those of you that know that big highball glass. Here's a very different painting that's from the point of view of a fly. I thought, what would be the only thing that would love this most disgusting beach I've ever seen, with dead leatherback turtles, possibly dead human bodies, and so on and so forth. Here's some fishing fantasies. That's me and my friends in Guyana fishing it's actually about 1994, but I made the painting in 2000. And here's a painting I made that's in the Smithsonian right now. This was taken a couple weeks ago next to a Thomas Moran painting. So my dreams have come true in so many ways, to be able to do this big painting called Manifest Destiny, which is about climate change and how climate and the sea level rise is going to affect different parts of New York City. This is facing east from the East River bank on the Manhattan side, looking towards Brooklyn. I originally showed it in Brooklyn in 2004. And here's a painting about the history of the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland. Shout out to Cleveland, anyone that loves Cleveland. It's been called the disgrace by the lake, all these terrible things, but I think it's a fascinating history, and it has a bright future in terms of if we could remove climate change from the equation. I think so many of the successes that humans have been able to pull off over, since the first wave of the eco movement, which I'm definitely a child of, have been somewhat miraculous. We've had so many setbacks. It's just the timing issue with climate change that I'm particularly concerned about. Childhood inspirations as a city kid, we all grew up, if we went to Manhattan, we went to the Central Park Zoo. My mom worked at the Museum of Natural History. She worked for Margaret Mead as a secretary to her assistant when she was 20 years old, and the Coney Island Aquarium. One of my dreams come true was to work for the Museum of Natural History in the late 90s and do a big project picturing things that photography can't do. That's one of the things that I love about what's possible with art is you can't do it with photography, you can't do it any way else. Make a painting of it. Use your subjectivity. Try to pull it off as a pictorial language. So my job is to show how do you show forest fragmentation and how that affects the forest. And I went down to Manaus for 2 weeks and talked to the scientists and made a series of images that were on the cover and inside Natural History magazine 25 years ago. Another big influence for me was my uncle, Irvin Rockman, who opened a whole new world of diving in Great Barrier Reef and Fiji and Tahiti. I went there as a child. And so many people were influenced by William Beebe, one of the great characters of American exploration. And obviously, we all grew up being obsessed with Jacques Cousteau. I think he's going to be mentioned in everyone's talk. As an inspiration, these figures became gatekeepers to this magical and fantastic world. And other things that really influenced me were films like King Kong, Willis O'Brien's classic from 1933, and Harryhausen's Mysterious Island from 1961. Other fantasy alternatives to actually go into these places, very vivid, captured my imagination. Sometimes I'd be disappointed I'd be in a place that didn't look like Kong's jungle. These are just examples of me over the years going to these places. My wife and I, Dorothy, were just in Ecuador a couple of weeks ago, and that was by far the biggest fish that everyone caught on the lower right. An ichthyologist friend of mine pointed out that's called Sardino. And I was like, or it should be called Sardini Piccolo. Trips that my wife and I have been able to go on, and she's a writer and often writes about our trips for the New York Times or travel magazines when they used to exist, unfortunately. So this was one of our trips to Antarctica, which many people in this room, I'm sure, have been on similar trips down the Antarctic Peninsula. Some photographs that we took. And ice is, of course, incredibly miraculous. There's nothing like it. Photography and painting really fail to live up to, the incredible beauty. Who needs to go to Mars when you can go there? And I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to do a huge 37-foot project that I showed at Mass MoCA around the same time, a couple of months after we got back, and that traveled around the country in various survey shows over the last couple of years. Here's a detail of it. Here's other versions of ideas about the ice and using color field painting, Morris Lewis format things, and turning that into abstract melting icebergs and putting Adelie penguins in that context, which I thought was interesting. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about a sort of side job that I have. As a kid, I always wanted to work in the film industry, and that's how I saw what I was interested in, finding a place before the contemporary art world changed enough so that you could basically do anything. So Ang Lee asked me to be inspirational artist on Life of Pi, and I ended up working on that movie off and on for about 3.5 years, and I'll show you a couple of examples of my work and then some frame grabs from the movie, and you can see our relationship. So that's Ang on the left, me 11 years ago, Susan McLeod, who is the visual effects producer, and Tim Squires, who is the editor. These are all, obviously, Ang is super important. There were thousands of people that worked on this movie that were geniuses, and I'm not taking any credit for the way the movie turned out, but I think we got off to a good start. So it was me in the room with a script and just talking to Ang about the feelings that he wanted. When I eventually saw it finished, I was so grateful because I thought I may never have this opportunity again to have the protection from such a great artist, Ang Lee, who protected me from Fox, and that's another story. And he had to protect himself too, and managed to get our vision onto the screen, which I just thought was so great. And a lot of these ideas were just conversations that I had with him and Jean Castelli, one of the producers, because there was big holes in the script, and we just had to figure out what the visuals would be. The Voyage to the Bottom of the Ocean, which is called Tiger Vision. Again, the ocean is always in whatever I'm doing for some reason. It's crazy. I didn't grow up on the water. This sort of hybrid vampire squid, bioluminescent fish with a lure on its head. Pi's mother made out of jellyfish, and so on. So after I finished that, it was a tough act to follow. I started to think about other projects that I wanted to do, that I wanted to produce myself, and I thought, you know, Alfred Russel Wallace is one of the great figures in natural history and history, and if anyone has any enthusiasm for Alfred Russel Wallace, I have a treatment for a limited series that I'd love to show you. I know there's interesting people in the room, so I'm just going to pitch that off on the side. I can say that a certain number of well-known platforms have come very close to giving it a green light, and then everyone got fired. So it's a long story, but I'm happy to sit down off the record over a beer or something, and we can talk about it. One of the things that I also love to do is do projects that are really cycles, and I was approached by Guildhall and Peabody Essex Museum in 2018 to do a project about shipwrecks through my lens, like what happened to, you know, this boat, that boat, and whatever. So I made my own version. In this case, it's like Norse mythology and Vikings. This is more, you know, sort of heavy metal looking. This is, speaking of Alfred Russel Wallace, his boat as it sank in 1852 with 4 years of his collecting from Brazil that went down with the ship, and he barely managed to survive. It's a tribute to his temperament that he managed to move on from that and discover the theory of natural selection independently of Darwin. That's one of the stories of the limited series. That's from the perspective of my cat. I saw her looking out the window. I'm like, okay, I got it. And her friend, the rat. I don't know which one's Leo, but you can figure it out. And then I just want to circle back and just say how grateful I am for the people that gave me the opportunity to imagine a life that includes all this wonderful stuff that I get to do, which is, you know, combine my love of art and my love of nature. And it's such an honor to talk to you guys. Thank you so much for having me.